Imagine this for a second. What if I told you that Tony Stark's entire journey as Iron Man, the victories, the mistakes, the heartbreaking sacrifice wasn't just a story about a billionaire, playboy who learned responsibility, but a shadowed blueprint of something darker? What if his rise and fall secretly mirrors the path of one of Marvel's most feared and complex villains? Dr. Victor Von Doom? Sounds insane, right? But stay with me, because when you start connecting the dots, the parallels are chilling. Think about it. Two men of genius intellect, born into very different worlds, yet both scarred by destiny, both obsessed with technology, both trying to master fate itself. One chose to wear the mask of a hero, the other forged the mask of a tyrant. But here's the question. What if those two paths are not opposites, but reflections of the same mirror? And what if the MCU has been preparing us, without saying it outright, for the shocking twist that Iron Man's story was always foreshadowing? Doom's arrival? Let's peel this back layer by layer. Because once we explore Tony Stark's rise, his mistakes and his ultimate sacrifice, you'll start to see echoes of Victor Von Doom in every single step. And by the time we reach the end of this theory, you might not see Iron Man's story as just a tale of redemption, but as a haunting prelude to Marvel's true endgame. Now let's begin. Tony Stark. When we first meet him, he's not a hero. He's reckless, arrogant, and drowning in his own genius. A billionaire weapons dealer profiting off war, with no sense of responsibility for the chaos his creations unleash. And then it happens, the event that changes everything. Captured in a cave, betrayed by his own technology, Stark is forced to confront his mortality. He builds his first suit of armor not to conquer, not to dominate, but to survive. That cave becomes his crucible, his rebirth. Now pause there. That cave, that moment? It looks eerily like the beginning of Victor Von Doom's story too. Doom is also scarred by an accident tied to his inventions. An accident that forces him into the armor, into the mask, into a destiny he can't escape. Just like Stark, his genius becomes both salvation and prison. And just like Stark, it all begins with tragedy. But the difference lies in the choices they make after that trauma. Stark decides to shut down his weapons manufacturing, to fight for a cause larger than himself. Doom, on the other hand, embraces the idea that only he has the power to reshape the world, to dominate it, because no one else is capable. Two men, same spark, different fires. And here's where things get chilling. If you strip away the labels of hero and villain, their journeys start looking almost identical. Tony builds his first armor, then keeps perfecting it. Doom builds his armor, keeps improving it. Tony tries to protect the world, but often creates greater threats in the process. Ultron, Civil War, the Sokovia Accords. Doom tries to control the world, but always claims it's for the greater good, for peace, for order. Doesn't that sound like the same man? Just walking down two sides of the same road? And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to ignore. Now let's zoom in on Stark's obsession. Tony can't stop building. From Mark Thorne to nanotech, his armor evolves not just as a tool, but as a manifestation of his fear, his trauma, his need to control the uncontrollable. Every time he's faced with chaos, his answer is the same: build a better suit, build a bigger system, build something to cage the storm. Remember how he built dozens of suits after the Battle of New York? Consumed by anxiety attacks? Haunted by the idea of threats beyond Earth? That obsessive tinkering, that paranoia, it's exactly what drives Doom. Victor Von Doom doesn't just build armor. He builds empires. He doesn't just fight enemies. He prepares for cosmic gods, multiversal invasions, apocalypses. He sees himself as the only safeguard against a universe that doesn't care about mortals. And when you put Tony's behavior under the same light, it's almost like Doom's path was written in Tony's DNA from the start. But here's the most unnerving part. Tony's downfall doesn't come from his enemies. It comes from himself. His inventions backfire. His decisions create division among heroes. His desperation to protect the world creates the very cracks that almost destroy it. And Doom? Doom's downfall is always his own hubris. His inability to let go of control. His conviction that only his way is right. The mirror becomes sharper, clearer, almost undeniable. So ask yourself, was Tony Stark really the MCU's greatest hero? Or was he a warning sign? Let's take a moment to trace the emotional backbone of this story. At the heart of Tony's journey is guilt. The guilt of selling weapons. The guilt of creating Ultron. The guilt of failing Peter Parker on Titan. It drives him, torments him, forces him into sacrifice. And at the heart of Doom's journey, pain. The pain of losing his parents, of seeing his people suffer, of being scarred forever by a single moment of failure. Pain and guilt, two sides of the same emotional chain. Both men shackled by the past, both trying to rewrite it with the power of their minds. But guilt, when mixed with genius, can lead to redemption or destruction. Tony's guilt ultimately leads to his sacrifice, his willingness to give up everything to save everyone. Doom's pain leads to tyranny, his refusal to ever feel powerless again. And here's where the theory sharpens into something terrifying. What if the MCU has been showing us Tony not just as a hero, but as a glimpse into what Doom will become? What if Tony Stark was the rehearsal, and Victor Von Doom is the final act? Think about it this way. The MCU is a narrative that thrives on echoes, reflections, and cycles. Captain America and Red Skull, two super soldiers on opposite sides of the same experiment. Thor and Loki, two brothers shaped by destiny, one a hero, the other a trickster. Wanda and Agatha, two witches, each shaped by grief, each walking different paths. Marvel loves its mirrors. And Iron Man and Doom? That's the ultimate mirror. Two men who are almost identical, except for the choices they made when staring into the abyss. And here's where it gets even wilder. What if Tony's absence in the MCU isn't an ending but a setup? A setup for Doom to walk onto the stage, carrying that same aura of genius, that same charisma, but twisted into something far more dangerous. Imagine how chilling it would be for audiences who loved Tony Stark to suddenly realize they've seen this man before. Not literally, but in spirit. Doom is Tony without the sacrifice. Doom is Tony without the redemption. Doom is Tony if he never stopped in that cave and said no more. And Marvel knows this. They've been planting the seeds. Let's rewind to one of Tony's most haunting quotes. In Avengers Age of Ultron, he says, "A suit of armor around the world." His dream was total control, total protection at any cost. That dream almost destroyed the Avengers. Now look at Doom, his dream, a suit of armor around reality itself. The God Emperor of Battleworld, the man who would reshape universes because he believes no one else is worthy. Isn't it the same voice? The same obsession? The same desperate need to control chaos? And that's why this theory matters. Because when Doom finally arrives in the MCU, he won't just be another villain. He'll be the ghost of Tony Stark. He'll be the reminder that genius and obsession can save the world or doom it literally. But let's slow down. We're only in the beginning of this story. Act 1 is just about laying the foundation. And already the parallels are unsettling. We've seen how their origins echo one another, how their traumas define them, how their obsessions drive them, and how their downfalls mirror each other. Now as we move deeper, we'll start connecting the bigger dots. The multiverse, the idea of legacy, the way Marvel loves to blur the line between hero and villain, and most importantly, the possibility that Tony Stark's journey wasn't the end of a chapter, but the foreshadowing of a darker reflection that's about to rise. Because if Tony Stark showed us what it looks like when genius chooses sacrifice, then Victor Von Doom is about to show us what happens when genius chooses domination. And when those two reflections collide in our minds, the MCU's future starts looking a lot more dangerous than we thought. When we left off, we had seen how Tony Stark's journey mirrors Victor Von Doom's in origin, obsession, and downfall. But here's where things get even more unsettling. If Act 1 was about recognizing the reflection, Act 2 is about realizing what that reflection means for the MCU's future. Because when Marvel tells stories, nothing is wasted. Every arc, every decision, every sacrifice echoes forward. And Tony Stark's echo? It doesn't end with his death on that battlefield. It stretches far beyond into the very fabric of the multiverse. Let's start with legacy. Tony Stark dies a hero. To the world, he becomes a legend, a symbol of sacrifice, the man who gave everything to save everyone. But what happens when legends fade? What happens when the world realizes they've lost not just a hero, but the only man crazy enough, brilliant enough, stubborn enough to keep fighting the impossible wars? That absence creates a vacuum. And nature, especially Marvel, hates a vacuum. In the comics, Doom often rises in the shadow of others. When Reed Richards steps back, Doom steps forward. When gods fall silent, Doom fills the void. And in the MCU, who better to fill the void left by Tony Stark than his dark reflection? The world once had Iron Man. Now it might get Doom, and the scariest part? The world might accept him. Because Doom doesn't arrive twirling a mustache. He arrives with charisma, intelligence, and conviction, the same way Tony once did. Imagine the global leaders of the MCU, scarred by Thanos, broken by multiversal fractures, desperate for someone to step up. They remember Iron Man, the man who always had a plan. And then here comes Doom, another genius, another armored figure promising solutions. To many, he might look less like a villain and more like Iron Man's heir. That's not just chilling, it's poetic. Now, let's look at Marvel's favorite trick, foreshadowing through the multiverse. The multiverse isn't just a playground of cameos and alternate costumes. It's a mirror machine. It shows us different versions of the same people, paths not taken, choices twisted into new destinies. And what's the most fascinating thing about Tony Stark across universes? He never survives. In What If, in fan theories, in rumored cameos, Tony's death seems inevitable. Why? Because Tony represents sacrifice. His multiversal constant is giving himself up for the bigger picture. But Doom's multiversal constant is survival. Not just survival, domination. In Secret Wars, Doom doesn't just survive the collapse of the multiverse. He takes it over. He becomes God Emperor Doom, reshaping reality itself with his will. Tony dies to save worlds. Doom reshapes them to his liking. Different outcomes but the same obsession with control. The multiverse, in its own strange way, is already telling us Tony and Doom are two sides of the same multiversal coin. And here's a wild thought. What if the MCU leans into that? What if Doom is introduced not just as a man, but as the multiversal shadow of Tony Stark? Not literally Tony, because that would undo his sacrifice, but symbolically, spiritually. A genius in armor, haunted by scars, obsessed with saving the world in his own way. A figure who feels so familiar, so Iron Man-like, that audiences can't help but see the ghost of Tony every time Doom speaks. And let's be honest, that's exactly the kind of narrative punch Marvel loves. Let's go deeper. One of Tony's most haunting arcs is in Civil War. He believes in systems, in oversight, in the idea that control is necessary, even if it means splitting the Avengers apart. That belief almost destroys the very family he helped build. Now think of Doom. His entire life is one long civil war. Doom doesn't just believe in control, he enforces it. He sees chaos and declares himself the cure, whether the world wants it or not. The Sokovia Accords? That was Tony Stark's version of Doom's philosophy. It's not about trust, it's about systems. It's about believing that genius knows best. And here's the kicker. What if Marvel seeded that in Civil War not just to explore Tony's flaws, but to foreshadow Doom's ideology? Tony was the rehearsal. Doom is the performance. Now take Ultron. Tony creates a monster in his attempt to protect the world. Ultron is arrogant, cruel, and convinced he knows better than humanity. Sounds a lot like Doom, doesn't it? The irony is painful. Tony created a machine that acted like Doom, and in doing so, revealed the villain he could have become. It's like the MCU was whispering, this is what happens when Stark's hubris runs unchecked. And now, years later, we're about to meet the flesh and blood version of that unchecked genius. But let's zoom out even further. Marvel loves myth-making. Each hero isn't just a character, they're an archetype. Captain America is the soldier. Thor is the god. Black Panther is the king. And Tony Stark? He's the genius who builds his way into the future. That archetype doesn't vanish when the man dies. It evolves, mutates, finds a new vessel. And who is the ultimate version of that archetype? Who is the final evolution of the man in the iron suit who refuses to bow to fate? It's Doom, always Doom. In the comics, Doom is more than just a villain. He's the culmination of the genius in armor story. He's what happens when you take Stark's archetype and push it past the point of no return. So when Marvel built Tony up as the centerpiece of the Infinity Saga, it wasn't just because audiences loved Robert Downey Jr. It was because they were constructing the archetype. And now with Tony gone, it's time to show us the corrupted version, the shadow that has always been waiting. And if that sounds too intentional, too crafted, remember, Marvel doesn't do things by accident. Let's talk about scars. Tony is scarred, but in ways you can't always see. Anxiety, PTSD, guilt. His scars are inside, etched into his mind. Doom's scars, on the other hand, are literal. His face is marred by an experiment gone wrong, an accident that mirrors Tony's shrapnel wound in the cave. Both men are forced to wear armor not just for protection, but for identity. Tony becomes Iron Man because he has to keep the shrapnel from killing him. Doom becomes Doom because he cannot bear the world to see his broken face. Both men are defined by scars. Both men hide behind masks of iron. And here's the tragic twist. Tony finds a way to let go. By the end of Iron Man 3, he removes the arc reactor. By Endgame, he embraces life with Pepper and Morgan, even if only for a short time. Doom never lets go. Doom never heals. Doom never stops hiding behind the mask. And that difference, healing versus obsession, is the razor-thin line between savior and tyrant. But it also means Doom is the continuation of Tony's story, the what if he never healed version. The multiverse doesn't even need to show us an alternate Tony Stark. Doom is already that alternate. Now let's connect this to Marvel's grand narrative. The Infinity Saga was about power, the Infinity Stones, the race to control them, the sacrifices made in pursuit of them. The Multiverse Saga is about control, the branches of reality, the variants, the timelines spiraling out of order. And who embodies the obsession with control more than anyone else? Kang the Conqueror, yes. But who surpasses even Kang? Doom. Tony Stark dreamed of a suit of armor around the world. Doom dreams of a suit of armor around the multiverse. The escalation is clear, and Marvel loves escalation. Every saga builds on the last, every villain mirrors the hero who came before. Just as Thanos was the dark mirror of the Avengers' unity, Doom is the dark mirror of Tony Stark's genius. And that makes his arrival not just inevitable, but narratively necessary. But here's where the theory gets its sharpest twist. What if Doom doesn't just mirror Tony metaphorically? What if the MCU actually uses Tony's legacy to bring Doom into focus? Maybe Doom acquires Stark tech. Maybe Doom is inspired by Stark's sacrifice. Maybe the world compares him to Iron Man so much that he leans into it, playing the role of the new armored savior, until the mask slips. Imagine the horror of seeing Doom rise while everyone whispers, "He's the next Iron Man." That's not just dramatic, that's devastating. Because for audiences, Tony's death was closure, but Doom's existence would shatter that closure, forcing us to re-examine everything we thought Tony stood for. Was Iron Man truly a hero? Or was he just the prototype of something darker? Was his sacrifice a triumph? Or was it simply paving the way for a shadow greater than Thanos himself? And suddenly the MCU becomes not just a story about heroes versus villains, but about the razor-thin line between them. By now you can see the shape of it. Tony Stark's journey wasn't just about redemption. It was about planting the seeds of doom. The cave, the armor, the obsession, the scars, the systems, the hubris, all of it foreshadowed the arrival of Victor Von Doom. And the multiverse, with all its echoes and mirrors, makes that arrival not just possible but inevitable. But here's the real question we need to confront as we move toward the final act. What happens when the MCU puts those two reflections side by side? Not literally Tony Stark versus Victor Von Doom, but the ghost of one man haunting the rise of another. What happens when audiences realize that everything they loved about Iron Man is about to be weaponized into the MCU's greatest villain? That's where Act 3 will take us. The climax. The collision of archetypes. The moment where Tony's sacrifice transforms from a heroic ending into a haunting foreshadowing of the darkest chapter Marvel has ever told. Because if Tony Stark showed us how genius could save the world, Doom is about to show us how genius could end it. So here we are. We've seen how Tony Stark's path mirrors Doom's beginnings. We've seen how his obsessions, scars, and failures foreshadow Doom's philosophy. And we've seen how the MCU's multiversal stage is perfectly set for a shadow to rise in Tony's absence. But now comes the climax. The moment where this theory twists into something darker. Something more haunting than we could have expected. Because the truth is this. Doom is not just Iron Man's mirror. Doom is Iron Man's inevitable evolution. Let's trace the arc. Tony begins as a man who believes only in himself. He's arrogant, reckless, convinced his genius makes him untouchable. Then he is broken by a cave, by a wound, by his own technology. He rebuilds himself, becomes Iron Man, learns to channel that genius into sacrifice. And yet, every step of the way, his obsession with control nearly consumes him. Ultron, Civil War, the endless parade of suits. Even in his happiest years with Pepper and Morgan, he can't stop tinkering. He can't stop building. He can't stop fearing what comes next. Now take Doom. Strip away the sacrifice. Strip away the willingness to let others lead. And you have the purest form of Tony Stark's obsessions. A man who believes the world is too dangerous to be left in anyone's hands but his own. A man who refuses to bow to gods, to destiny, to fate. Doom is Tony's story without the redemption. Doom is Tony without the cave, without the family, without the Avengers to ground him. Doom is what happens when genius never finds humility. And here's the terrifying twist. Maybe the MCU wanted us to fall in love with Tony Stark, not just because he was a hero, but because he was the perfect setup for a villain we would instinctively understand. Think about storytelling structure. Marvel has always mirrored arcs across sagas. Loki rises in Thor's shadow. Killmonger rises in T'Challa's. Thanos rises in the shadow of the Avengers' unity. Each saga escalates the stakes by presenting a villain who is not a stranger, but a reflection of what we've already seen. So why should the multiverse saga be different? Why shouldn't Doom rise as the reflection of the man who defined the Infinity Saga? And imagine the emotional gut punch of it. For over a decade, audiences adored Tony Stark. His humor, his brilliance, his flaws. We watched him grow from selfish to selfless, from arrogant to sacrificial. We cried when he snapped his fingers, when he whispered, "I am Iron Man." That ending was supposed to be closure, but Doom reopens the wound. Doom forces us to ask, was Tony's journey truly an ending? Or was it just the prologue to something darker? Because every time Doom appears, audiences will feel it, the ghost of Tony Stark. Every time he raises his voice, every time he reshapes reality with his iron will, every time he insists that only he can save the world, we'll hear echoes of Tony. And that's what will make Doom not just a villain, but a tragedy. Now let's explore the most chilling possibility. What if Doom doesn't just echo Tony metaphorically, but literally carries his legacy? What if Doom acquires Stark tech, or recruits remnants of Stark Industries, or even claims inspiration from Tony himself? Imagine Doom standing before the world, declaring, "Iron Man dreamed of protecting this world. I will finish what he began." On the surface, he would look like a successor, but beneath the mask, he's a tyrant. That is storytelling at its sharpest edge, twisting love into fear, hope into dread. And Marvel loves to weaponize nostalgia. We've seen it with Spider-Man No Way Home with Professor X in Multiverse of Madness. They know the power of bringing back familiar echoes. And Doom, tied to Tony Stark, would be the ultimate echo. Because he doesn't just remind us of Iron Man, he corrupts him. But let's step even further into the multiverse. We've seen universes where Tony dies again and again. But what if somewhere out there exists a universe where Tony didn't choose sacrifice? What if there's a Tony who, instead of snapping his fingers, chose domination? That Tony wouldn't be the man we loved. He would be Doom, not literally, of course, but spiritually. And if the MCU ever dares to show us that reflection, it would devastate audiences. Imagine Doctor Strange or Reed Richards whispering, "We've seen your hero before." He looked like Tony Stark, but he wore a mask of iron, and he called himself Doom. That's the kind of storytelling that turns theories into legend. Now, let's pull this into Marvel's bigger picture. Secret Wars. In the comics, Doom is not just a villain. He is the villain. The man who stands above gods, who bends the multiverse to his will. He becomes God Emperor Doom, ruler of Battleworld, master of fragments of shattered realities. And the most shocking part? For a moment, he isn't entirely wrong. Doom does what no one else can. He saves something from nothing. He builds order out of collapse. He creates stability where chaos once reigned. It is tyranny, yes, but it is also survival. Now ask yourself, who else does that sound like? A man who created Ultron to protect the Earth. A man who fought to sign the Sokovia Accords to maintain order. A man who said, "If we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn sure we'll avenge it." Tony Stark was the rehearsal. Doom is the finale. What if it was also about preventing himself from becoming Doom? Think about it. Tony at his core knows his weaknesses. He knows his obsession with control, his inability to stop building, his endless paranoia. What if deep down, Tony knew that if he kept going, if he survived, he would eventually become the very tyrant he always feared? His snap wasn't just victory. It was prevention. It was the only way to stop Iron Man from becoming Dr. Doom. And now with Tony gone, Doom will rise anyway. Not because Tony failed, but because stories demand balance. The shadow follows the light. The mirror always comes back. That's the haunting truth. Tony Stark wasn't just a hero. He was a warning. A warning of the man who's coming next. So where does that leave us? It leaves us staring down the future of the MCU not with hope, but with dread. Because the world that lost Iron Man is about to meet his reflection. And this time there will be no Avengers strong enough. No sacrifice large enough to stop the shadow from spreading. Victor Von Doom isn't just the next big villain. He's the ghost of Iron Man twisted into iron tyranny. He is Tony Stark's journey stripped of redemption. He is the reminder that genius is not inherently good or evil. It is the choices made with it. And the line between savior and conqueror is thinner than a single snap of the fingers. And so when Doom finally steps into the MCU, remember this theory. Remember Tony's cave, his armor, his obsessions, his fears. Remember the mirror we've been staring into all along. Because when Doom declares himself ruler of all, when he dons the mask and the armor, when he says the world needs him, you'll realize something chilling. We've seen this story before. We've cheered for it. We've cried for it. We've called it heroic. But this time the man in the iron mask won't save us. This time the man in the iron mask will be our Doom. And that's the end of the story. The shocking twist that Iron Man's journey was never just about him. It was about preparing us for Doom, the genius, the mask, the obsession, the scars, the legacy, the multiverse. It all points to the same inevitable truth. Tony Stark's rise and sacrifice was the bright reflection. Victor Von Doom is the shadow. And the MCU has only just begun to show us what happens when the shadow takes center stage. If you've made it this far into the theory, thank you for sticking with us. If this left you thinking differently about Iron Man, Doom, and the future of the MCU, don't forget to like this video, share it with other Marvel fans, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive theories like this. And if you want to support us directly so we can keep building these stories, consider hitting that super thanks button with a $25 contribution. It goes a long way in helping us keep the lights on and craft even more epic breakdowns. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.